You're listening to Extra Textual. This is a show where we talk about an idea, concept, theme, trend, and relate it to some kind of media like film, TV, video games, books, music, and hopefully discover something about ourselves or our culture along the way. Thanks for listening. Okay, welcome to the show. This is Eli Steenledge, and with me is
Jeremy Holiday.
And on this episode, we are talking about
Into the Spider-Verse.
Yeah. Still reverbing? Okay.
We got it, yeah. And I'm using my new board, so we got some special effects from time to time.
Yeah, it's our new thing.
Yeah, totally
it's
cool.
going to be a tradition.
Yep.
So yes, the new Spider-Man animated film,
Yeah.
Into the Spider-Verse, which I think for a lot of people kind of came out of nowhere a little bit.
Yeah.
This year, well, I should say now, in 2018,
Yeah.
there had been some previews about it, but I don't think we fully knew what it was going to be like or how good it was going to be for the most part.
Yeah. No, I personally had no idea it was going to be as good as it was. The one indication I had, though, like when I saw the trailer for it, I think when I was watching Infinity War in the theater, I probably saw 7 or 8 trailers that day. Didn't remember any of them, but I saw Into the Spider-Verse, and the two things I thought about it were, that is a stupid title, and
It is a little silly, yeah.
nothing happens in the trailer. It's just a really cool visual thing.
Yeah.
And when I thought about it, I was like, the film must be really good because they are doing almost nothing to sell it for me, and it has a terrible title.
And it still looks good.
Still
want to see it.
Right? No, I mean, it made me want to see it even more because I was like,
there's more going on.
Right.
Yeah.
If they're confident enough in the quality of the film that they don't have to in a world me about it.
Right. Yeah.
I would. And I guess what I'm saying is it really stood out.
Yeah.
And it also because of the visual style of it, that's essentially all I needed to see. And I was like, I want to watch that thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was pretty far into the marketing, maybe even third major trailer before I knew that there was going to be multiple spider people, spider persons, that I just thought it was about that main Miles character, Miles Morales. I mean, I think one of the ways I wanted to talk about it today is that it did surprise us a little bit, and I think how groundbreaking the animation style is. Yeah. Maybe not completely like to say we've never seen any of these things, but in the way that it sort of goes against how most animated films look these days. Yeah. And trying different things, and also going back to embracing the comic book style of it.
Yeah. One of the things that much of what will happen in the next hour is me gushing about how much I like this film.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
But one of the things that I'll say is, when I first started, one of the things I compare it to, when I watched the Clone Wars television show, there was something about the style of those characters and those droids in that world that I felt worked so much better than the visual style of the actual prequels. To say, because much of the droids were animated and because there's a lot of CGI, it made a lot of sense that the entire world was animated. And because I felt like it allowed what I think probably George Lucas was going for, to be sympathetic, having a lot of control over what people looked like and the scenery and all that stuff, and it allowed that to make sense in a way that the acting was so flat in the first 3 in most cases, unfortunately. But it just comes alive when you're just dealing with voice actors, and that and the style of Clone Wars is unique. It's CGI, but it's not super realistic CGI,
right?
And it has a very distinctive style, just in which characters are kind of lean and lanky a little bit, very much like the characters we see primarily in Into the Spider-Verse.
Yeah, Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think a contact point for me, just broadly, would be at least like growing up in the U.S., me experiencing certain Japanese anime for the first time.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say there is an anime connection into the Spider-Verse, which is pretty fun with one of the characters, but I'm not saying it's anime style.
Yeah.
Just that it was for me seeing that, there are people experimenting with different kinds of animation.
Right.
And, showing action and motion in different ways. Some touch points, I mean, just like personally for me, would be something like an old like Captain Harlock, where it's very like stylized, sort of space opera. The characters are very stylized and look very cool. They do have that thin aspect, actually, which is not, again, a direct connection. And then a film like Paprika, which maybe I've mentioned before and really love. But there's a few connections actually into the Spider-Verse, but that like playing with sort of the meta-ness of it being animation.
Yeah.
And that film kind of dealt with like dreams and stuff, but I think it lent itself to you can do whatever you want in animation.
Yeah.
So
many things that I want to say, Eli. So many things. I'll start off by saying one of the connections that I kept thinking about and watching it is when I first saw the movie Tron. And one of the things that I love about Tron is you can take almost any... It's about composition. You can take almost any frame of that film and put it up on a wall, and it's a beautifully composed, proportionate shot. And I think the same is true with Into the Spider-Verse. I mean, you can take almost any film, any still of that film, and put it up on the wall, and it will be a beautiful piece of art. And I know from reading a bit about on the internet that they took a very long time, even from when, like, in post-production for animation, like, between when they had almost everything done and they had the finished product. And there's a lot of hand-drawn touch-ups on almost all of the on all the cells,
illustrated style,
and it shows. I mean, it's one of those things that, like, one thing I compare it to, for those of you that have played Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild on the Switch. I mean, for the first, like, I don't know, 20 or 30 hours I played it, like, I was perfectly content just to, like, have Link walk through the high grass at sunset, because it's so phenomenally beautiful in all its aspects. And the same was true with this film. Like, from the very beginning, like, there's so much... One of the ways I often evaluate films is, like I was talking about, is like this tableau standard. Like, if you have a shot, like, even though things are moving through the shot, like, do the basic parts of the shot form like a satisfying tableau if you were to take a picture of it? And every single bit of this film is that way. And even like the half bits when, like, he's flipping up into the air, I mean, every single thing looks fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I read an interview with the directors. I think there's 3 that work together. They said that was one of their goals, is like, if you freeze frame any moment in this film, it's going to look like a panel in a comic book or something, like an illustrated piece of artwork. And I think they totally were successful. Yeah.
And what I think, I mean, when I was reading about the process they were going through, it just reminded me of, like, the documentaries I've watched about, like, the making of James and the Giant Peach, or Nightmare Before Christmas, or even Kubo and the Two Strings, where there's just so many actual hours and actual care put into it. And I mean, I won't do this too much, but, like, to contrast that with Infinity War, which I absolutely despised, even more now that I see what a superhero film can be, it's like there's just no excuse for that. Jiggly purple mess.
Yeah, I mean, I want to get more into just the difference in the narrative of this film compared to all of the Marvel Universe films we've seen so far. But kind of sticking with the style, for our listeners, I do want to point out some of the specific elements that we're talking about as far as, like, the style while we're mentioning it. I think for the most part, a way to explain it is that they did try to make it look like an illustrated comic book in a lot of ways, and add elements. And it's this unique combination that we haven't seen before of, like, I think the characters are mostly sort of CG, looking. They have that nice look to them, that sheen, but then they sort of put over it, like you mentioned, this sort of illustrated style. So, I really enjoyed, even when there wasn't a lot of action that you would see. I think like one time when he's in the graveyard, if you pay close attention, you can see like the shading is kind of done with like the cross-hatching style. Like it's drawn. We get the like dual tone, like two-tone colors separation, like you might see in the like Lichtenstein paintings from like comics, where you see the dots. I really enjoyed that. Like they had to kind of intentionally put those elements in to give it that feel, and I was just like infinitely fascinated to watch those pieces of it. Like I'm excited to see it again, just to like focus on those elements. But from what I understood, a lot of that they had to reinvent sort of the modern animation process and throw it out. And the directors also said one of their goals is like, if it looked like another animated film, they said we're doing it wrong. Like we need it to look different. And so a lot of the streamlined process, because now like all animated films and all studios make them, are CG, computer generated. And so they had to kind of step back and say, we're not going to use that technology to do this. We're going to do it a different way. And a cool thing that I think people might see but not think about is, I was reading, normally, for you film people out there, traditional film is 24 frames. And so when they did hand-drawn animation, they'd have to do essentially that many drawings in a second. Technically, when they did hand-drawn ones, they would do a frame, like the same frame twice in a row. So it was actually kind of like half, but it still worked. So it was a little choppier than what we see in CG. And so they actually went and used that. And if you watch the film, it is a little bit jerkier movements than you're used to. That was something intentionally that they wanted to go back to. To give it a different feel. Then things to look so smooth that you kind of don't take the time to notice the uniqueness. Right,
and I think there's some good old retro 8 or 16-bit graphics games. This was a really big year for that. Celeste was a really big one. Dead Cells was another. And certainly with Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild has a very stylized three-dimensional world. It is not like hyper-detailed. But it is fantastically beautiful nonetheless. And I think that there, for a long time, has been a push to make things look better and more realistic and have more vectors and make everything. But the thing that I compare it to is like, if you were to compare sort of like film with like daytime television, there was a sense like, even though we were able to get 60 frames per second or something really, really cool, it didn't look great, which is not in particular a slight against daytime television, but like for a long time, the quality of viewing experience from something that was a little less smooth was more artistic and more pleasing. And I think that there's certainly, well, I don't know. I mean, maybe we somehow discover through this film and around this time that. That there is, I guess, a time and a place for that level of detail. But it is absolutely not required. And I think, I think one of the reasons why this film reminds me of a lot of stop motion animation is because of like reduced frame rate. And I don't know if it's like nostalgia on my part, but it was because it was from the first second visually different. Like my eyes and brain were processing this thing differently. It was just, like so rich and interesting, like meeting someone that you've never met before. That it seemed clearly, and I'd be interested to see like what we think about it in 10 years. But at this exact moment, it was the exact thing that I thought should have been made.
I mean, I think there's some things happening sort of even subconsciously with like the love that they put into and the thinking they put into conveying it this way. And they actually said they varied those frame rates sometimes. So when they did want him to like sort of explode in motion to do something, they would do it every single frame and it looked very smooth. And then other times they would emphasize that sort of skip frames or double frames. And they also said it gave it an effect that you're seeing the images for longer. And that also gives you an impression that you can like focus on them as a comic panel.
Yeah.
So like when he did, there's certain action moments too, it's almost like more of a freeze frame than we're used to.
Yeah.
So they can emphasize kind of the cool like poses and stuff
right,
that you would see in comic books. Whereas, in other animation, it's so fast that you don't get a chance to.
Right.
And
I mean, and I think like the last, one of the things that, I don't know if it was Pixar innovated it, but like, so once we have hyper-realistic CG animation, you then have to add motion blur, right? Because it looks too real. So you have to like imitate what the mind or brain or eyes would do if you were watching that thing happen in front of you, with the distance, variable distance from you to the thing.
Yeah.
I just remember like one of my film classes at the UW with Patrick Keating. It's a standard class, but he did a very good job of talking about like the various cues that you can use to create depth. And for him, his big part was like it's a 2-dimensional image,
right? But
we create the illusion that it's 3 dimensions. And some of it, and so like there are various ways about variable diffusion and things in the foreground moving faster and things in the background.
Yeah.
That those are the techniques that animation picks up on to mimic the picture of reality.
Yeah.
And I think that there's just a way in which these tableaus and the way that is manipulated in this film, there seems to be so much more attention paid to like the full depth of field, if you will.
Yeah.
That like reminds me a little bit also of like Hitchcock and and Orson Welles and these other films where you literally can. It's so much attention is paid to it that you can cut it in half,
right.
And one half of it still has like sufficient composition and attention that it's worthwhile. And it just contrasts so highly for me with a lot of the previous Marvel movies, Infinity War in particular, but where they're taking something that comes out of a comic book and adapting it to quote unquote real life, because half of that stuff is animated anyway. It's interesting to see another approach where you only pull it halfway out of the comic book.
Yeah, their goal is not to make it look photorealistic
or
whatever. And I think there's a lot of advantages to the technology, though, even if they didn't use it in the traditional way.
Yeah.
Because we get this sort of 2D comic book feel to it, like illustrated. But yet, I think the characters, the way they're built, traditionally with like CG is this like wireframe figure, and I think they're still doing that.
Yeah.
And so the characters have like a weight to them. I feel like that was hard to get in traditional like hand-drawn animation.
Yeah.
Unless you're really thoughtful about that.
Yeah, there's clearly some. Like the physics engine for more is good.
Yeah, it's
really strong, and they use it effectively. I remember. Have you ever read the Amazing Adventures of Kevlar and Clay?
I have. Yeah.
So there's the part in there after they go and see Citizen Kane. When he's eventually working on sort of his magnum opus, and they're changing all the different things. But I remember him like there's a point where they're talking about I think he's talking about when he's writing the comic book about the Golem, like how he draws his feet to show how much he weighs. And in this film there's a lot of times where like what I remember is Miles' spider feet, or so much attention paid to physically conveying the size and mass and weight through these things where there's just like I love the Lord of the Rings films, but like when like Legolas flips on the side of the horse while he's getting on riding. He's just like there's and that's ages ago,
right?
But like there's a weightlessness and ragdoll quality that stretches the imagination.
Yep.
And I think part of that's the fact that it's integrating both live and CGI in a cool way, but clumsy. That if you deal with the world, if the world is entirely CG, it seems like they can do a better job with it.
Yeah, that's just how elves move, by the way.
I know. And sorry, Peter. Thank you for the film.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, depth of field too, some of that may have not been able to have the complexity that it does without the computer aspects to it.
Yeah,
the CG. So again, they're utilizing all their tools, but in unique new ways.
Yeah.
To really bring it to life.
So if we move to narrative for a little bit,
or
if it makes sense to move to that part, two openers I want to say. One of the things that I often evaluate things by is what I would call like the Green Lantern Challenge. Because Green Lantern traditionally as for those of you that read the comic books, and I'm not like a super aficionado, but like the Green Lantern has like the Lantern Ring, and anything that he or various members of the Green Lantern Corps can think, they can make. And so there have been numerous runs of Green Lantern, and many of them are mediocre at best, and certainly like a lot of adaptations of his character are often terrible. Mainly because I think the authors can't handle that blank canvas. Yeah. Like what I mean, because like I think it honestly takes years to come up with a good story that involves some element of that infinity, that infinite possibility. Watching this film, however, with its sprawling multiple verses, I was like, this is about the best. I mean, they could do anything, and the thing that they do is pretty darn great. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons that I can say that is twofold. The first of which is this film represents, to my mind, the same kind of meta change in comic books that like the What If comics do. Yeah. And that like there's a transitioning from one sort of age of comic books to another. A little bit before we get to graphic novels, but we start thinking about multiple dimensions and bigger heroes and what happens when people cross over and all this sorts of other stuff. And you come up with crazy stuff that I think, for those of you that read those comic books or stole your older brother's versions of the comic books, whatever the case may be, the sheer possibility of all these things becomes really, really cool. And I think that if we take all the Marvel films up to this point, they're sort of telling us stories about superheroes. And this is like, all right, what if there are like 7 different dimensions in which... and the effect of it is that you get to tell very well, in their case, like 7 different Spider-Man stories. And they do...
origin stories.
Yeah, it's like 7 different origin stories. And I don't think I've ever seen a better multiple dimension quasi time traveling adventure that I like or think is done as well as this one. It's also like amazingly efficient storytelling. Yep. And they're like, okay, so here's how the story starts, and they do a balance of both recapitulating that it is still Spider-Man's story, but that is also a different Spider-Man story, and it also the other thing that allows you to do, I think, is also from a standpoint, if we look at The Last Jedi for a moment, and recognize that Russian bots are part of the reason why some people are grumpy about it.
Right. It is a great film, yeah.
And I also recognize, that one of the things I said when we talked to Annalise was that the truth is that like we get Luke that's established the Jedi Academy in those novels, and we also get grumpy old Luke that exists in this film. Like they literally both exist, and they're different tellings of a particular story. Yeah. And I haven't ever seen that in one film. Right? It's like having Spider-Man and the Amazing Spider-Man in the same film. Yeah. And or like various Captain America and Captain, I don't know, so there's other versions of Captain America in the same film, and they don't just do 2, they just do, I mean, there's and they do so many that I think that it's in some like it just blew my mind. The long and short of it is it blew my mind, and I also think that it was the first time I saw someone in this Marvel universe, 'cause it's not the MCU, it's whatever this is, like fully sit down and accept the responsibility of 40 or 50 years of Spider-Man stories, right? I mean, for me, like there's a lot of DC comics that I like, and also Marvel ones done by a man named Alex Ross. Paul Dini does a lot of the writing for them. And they're definitely, I mean, like Alex Ross does sort of hyper-realistic things, and they're really interesting. But they're all sort of different tales about, like the Kingdom Come is about tales about like what happens when these big DC superheroes are really, really old, right? And it's like, and they don't exist in parallel to the other stories. They exist in sort of separate little tellings of them. Yep. Into the Spider-Verse is the first film I've ever seen, or the first narrative story I've ever really seen, that decided to integrate all of those characters into one story. Like the Peter B. Parker character. I mean, he's sort of like similar to the version of Spider-Man that shows up in Marvels, which is a book that Alex Ross did.
Yeah.
And certainly like that concept, that idea is present in the Spider-Man story itself. The implication, like what happens afterwards,
later, yeah.
and like the idea. I mean, what I liked most about the narrative is first of all that they included all these different what ifs on a very wide palette. Mm-hmm. Peter Porker, Penny Parker, Spider-Man Noir, and had those things, had that as a concept come together in a story that was entertaining,
right,
and was not filled with holes and was enjoyable from beginning to end.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think this film, in some ways, for how much I've heard people say, like, this is the best Spider-Man film. Like, why couldn't have we had a Spider-Man film this good before, tell this story? But I think in some ways it's benefited from us knowing so many Spider-Man stories and narratives. And so it plays with that in sort of this meta way. Like we get acknowledgement of the Sam Raimi films right away.
Right.
With the real Peter Parker. Like those happened. Yeah. And then we don't quite get maybe acknowledgement of the other versions, but there's Peter B. Parker, and so we get these different versions, so it's still playing with our concept of that. And I like that it's playing with origin stories, because we're so used to that with the MCU now. Yeah. Like, we've watched so many origin stories, and so they just like breeze through those. But we still get this emotional weight. In a similar way we get than what The Last Jedi did, going back to that, is it kind of opened up the Force to everyone. Yeah. That it's possible. This film kind of says, like, well, anybody could be behind that mask. Right. But it is hard. You still have to go through trials, and it's tough. Yeah. And I'm not sure what I totally think of it as a plot point exactly, but they all were sort of like, well, we all lost somebody. And I think that was meant to be more like, that's what being a hero is. Yeah. Like, standing up for that is that you were going to lose people. But they have this sort of shared experience to do what they're doing.
Well, okay, yeah. And there's so like, when they like meet each other and their spider sense goes off. Yeah. That is so cool, fucking genius. Yeah. I mean, like...
And the way it's visualized?
The way it's visualized, the way it happens in the story, the voice acting around it. Yeah. I mean, like, that is one of the most, like, interesting and emotionally evocative things I have seen in a superhero film anywhere. Yeah. And like, it is honestly the thing that I think that in our world, what superhero stories and comic books do. Like, it's the feeling that, like, when I am at an airport and I see someone, as a black man with a Scout Regiment T-shirt on from, Attack on Titan, and I look at him and go, I like your T-shirt, and he's like, yeah, man. Yeah. Like, the bond that we have, like, and so, like, that's the thing that they do there. Like, oh, you're like me. Yeah. Like, I mean, it's, and again, for, like, that to be, for that deeply honest emotion to be in a fantastical film about multiple, and buildings shooting out of. I mean, it's just fantastic. The other thing is, I don't know exactly who is responsible for the creation of Miles Morales as the character. I know that Jason Reynolds did a lot of writing at various points. Where I don't know if he's the origin of that character. He's a fantastic character. Yeah. And we're reading the chapter book here at home because we fell in love with the character in the movie, and we've I think we actually read some kids books that included him in it. Okay. And Jason Reynolds also wrote a series of books. The first of which is called Ghost, about young black people running track. Which I think the second one isn't as great. Sorry, but the first one is great, really, and we listen to it as family as an audiobook, and he's a really great writer. I think he writes all kinds of stuff. But Miles Morales is a very compelling character, and I think is a really fresh, interesting take on Spider-Man, and I honestly identify he does it for me more than what's his name?
Peter Parker.
Yeah, I mean Peter Parker, but
Tobey Maguire.
And Tobey Maguire's fine. Yeah, but and like if I look at the way that like Miles is characterized, like he keeps like how he chills out, like from being stuck on things, is to like kind of like sing along to songs like that.
That's a great moment when he has to learn to like calm down.
Yeah,
and he uses that method. Yeah,
right. And to be in a place where, because there's the parts too in the Tobey Maguire films when like he gets stuck to the ceiling or whatever, and it just feels it doesn't resonate the way Miles as a character does, because it's also like Miles's family and Miles's world is complex, and certainly like in the novel, like it's even for like a higher age kind of than it's really complicated.
I think this is the second film I've seen this year, which I think is okay that it does the same thing, but it's pretty amazing that also in The Hate U Give, they have this similar aspect of a teenager who is going to this other school out of their normal community to sort of get a better education and stuff, but they both portray the sort of code switching that has to happen between their different communities. And we get even more here because his parents are different races. And so it's a very multicultural community. But I think to be able to portray that and have like have two parents at home in both of these films, and they both make the point to the parents say like, we're gonna stay in this community. Yes, we know we could probably have like maybe an easier, better life somewhere else, but like we are taking on the responsibility to say like we can be a part of making this community better. And it's important that we stay here. And I think that's like a message you never see, or like a portrayal in those neighborhoods, and it is pretty great to
and there's even more emphasized in the book. There's like Miles gets in trouble and his dad like has him clean up a bunch of stuff, which is I think like mimicked. It makes its way into the movie because he like his dad wants him to go clean up the stickers. It's just like for all of the talk in like the Batman films about how like Bruce Wayne is gonna save his city, and the talk in in the early Spider-Mans about how like he's got to take care of people, he's got that responsibility. It never works as well as it does as in the character of Miles Morales in this film. Because I mean, it really like because that world that he's inhabited and the things that are going on, the big crimes, the petty crimes, all these things, that's the world that feels like the world that I see. That feels like this world, right? Not like some fantastical 1950s superhero world, but like, and again, it's also the world that exists, I think, also in films like Logan. Logan, I mean, it's not, there's a little too much blood flying all over the place. But that is a messy, complicated world that feels similar to mine. And I think that it's something that, like, in reading comic books, they have felt realer to me than the cinematic ones, oftentimes, because of the world around the superheroes. And again, like, I mean, I would take like the world of the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because of the more complex things that are going on and grittier in various places and sadder because S.H.I.E.L.D. falls. BT dubs. That it felt more resonant. And I think that, and I don't know what that means, but there's a sense that like it felt liberating and exciting. Like there, and I think, and I wonder how much that comes from Jason Reynolds' conception of Miles Morales' character. Because it's, I mean, in some sense, it's like a fresh take on Superman. I mean, Spider-Man, but it's also like, I mean, who is Spider-Man? Spider-Man is like a kid in an area, who like isn't like ends up trying to like take care of his neighborhood. And
I think this characterization of Spider-Man brings a lot of energy because of who he is to the film. If you think back to the other portrayals, like it's just it's more fun to watch anything that he does. I just love a lot of the elements that they bring to this film, like the the stickers that he's putting on things is like things people actually do to cheaply, get their artwork out there and be able to experience that. And doing like graffiti and stuff as an art form, I think is cool to see in that legitimate way. And little jokes thrown in there, knowing about like Banksy and stuff, were pretty fun. But yeah, I mean, I think going back to like the narrative and what they put into it, compared to like the MCU and characters, like there's just a lot more care given to who these characters are. Like, and even for an animated film, I think the original Peter Parker towards the beginning, like when they're at the like reactor thing, and he's like trying to take care of it, and he's like, I'll do what I need to do. Like, I'll take care of it. And then he's like, I'm really tired. Like, just little things with like that thrown in there that like, what? Who is this character? Like, this is like a real person. He's not just like superhero that we're throwing around.
Right. I mean, there's just the sense too that in so many of the other MCU films, as fun as they are, the characters are they just feel to me so much like it's a weird American 1950s character. I mean, Tobey Maguire, Peter Parker's like, well, gosh, MJ, and and like they're it just feels like, and part of the reason why I like Captain America in the films is he's very explicitly that person, and so they like make fun of it, and it's it's silly.
True.
And you have, I think, in the first Avengers, like Hulk ends up being a little bit, it tries to ground people in reality,
right?
And like Tony Stark is like Val Kilmer in Real Genius, but it's still somehow grounded in an unreal place. That again, from the even though Miles Morales' New York is kind of future-y a little bit, it feels much more like this world. And I think if I, from my like perspective about heroes and archetypes, like the hero starts in our world, encounters an unsolvable problem in our world, and undertakes a great journey to do a variety of other things, testing themselves, gaining friends, gaining guides, equipment, to defeat a final challenge, and then come back to the same place that they were and be able to change our world. Right? But it's ultimately, and I think that's where heroes come from. They come from us encountering insurmountable problems in our world. And to not have them grounded in that, it makes them interesting stories, but they don't have the kind of power that they need to. And I think that I also like in this story very much that Kingpin's motivations are very singular. And I think that,
and personal,
I mean, they do, and I think that's the way that character. I mean, he gets portrayed a variety of different ways, kind of silly, but I think the best portrayal of him, I mean, he's a damaged child,
right?
And he wants, and he can't handle the monster that he is. He wants to, almost like the Godfather, but worse.
And I would say my only sort of, like you said, there's going to be a lot of praise on this episode for this,
right?
And my only. The only downside I sort of saw was it felt a little bit like it was falling under the same problem a lot of modern superhero action films have. The ending was quite chaotic in that battle. Like they sort of solve the problem for all the spider persons from the different dimensions, and then it's like, oh, but now you gotta face Kingpin. And I mean, that's like classic, there's like the final boss or whatever, but it felt a little bit like, okay, things like are flying around through this whole sequence, and it like became a little too much for me. Could have been clear, but what I did like about that final thing is Kingpin's on this train. They end up on the train car, and it starts to work. What his goal is, his family starts to show up, his wife and child, and he's sort of starting to get what he wants, but he realizes he's in the same situation why his wife and child turned off from him originally. He's like back reliving that in that moment. And I just thought that was really poignant in a lot of ways, about saying who he was in a shorthand. Like, otherwise he comes across as a very just like straightforward, horrible boss person. But in that moment, it just kind of showed the sort of cycle that people get stuck in, or the trap when you continue to live your life that way, that you can't get out. Eventually it's going to catch up with you in that way, the way that you act. And I think that goes back to the choice of what Miles has to make, or you know, and also Peter B. Parker is like, what kind of person am I going to be as this year? Like, again, you have the power, you have responsibility, but I think they end up giving it a little bit different angle in this film than like the original.
Yeah, and I mean, on the issue of responsibility, I mean, I think that, like, I don't know from whence the interaction between Peter B. Parker and Miles, in which Miles says, you know, with great power comes great, and Peter B. Parker says, don't you dare finish that quotation. Like, but that's fantastic. And it also represents a number of things to me. One, I would suspect that either that was some nugget that someone had in their head for a long time and found a place for it, or they spent a lot of time workshopping and editing to come up with that dialogue, because it's great. One of the things that's great is, like, we don't even have to, we know that phrase. Right? So if we all know that, you don't have to say it, so you can do something else with it. Right? And I think that part of the problem with like the traditional pre-Spider-Verse superhero films is that they're too busy doing the thing for us. Like, you got to know that with great power comes great responsibility. But this movie is like, okay, you know, like, again, like, yeah, you know all that stuff. Let's have fun with it. And I think that that was great. I mean, with Kingpin, like, I like the ending. You know, I mean, it was somewhat formulaic, of course. Like, I mean, it wasn't super innovative in that way, but I mean, I do think that, like, it made a lot of sense, right? That, like, ultimately, as much as Fisk tries to do something else, he hasn't changed what he's doing, right? And that he would be in the same situation. It also makes him sympathetic and tragic, which in general I think is an important part of any villain. Right? You know, I mean, one of my favorite, like, superhero villain pairs is in Unbreakable, in which, because in that film, both Bruce Willis's character, whose name I never remember, and Mr. Glass, like Bruce Willis is somewhat responsible for all of the destruction that he causes. Because Mr. Glass is just trying to find someone who's like him, and does all these things to try to come across him, with the idea that if there's someone that's as breakable as him, there must be someone who is unbreakable. And it makes, he's evil, I mean, he does evil things, but, like, at its heart there is some good motivation, which just comes from this adage, or it goes along with this adage, that people are almost always heroes in their own story. And to conceive of some manner of, I mean, and these are supervillains, right? So they have to be some manner of appropriate archetype, or it just doesn't work. I also think that because Fisk is used sparingly, it has a lot to do with his success. Because I think that, like, if we look at this character in Daredevil, he's good in little bits, but when he's on there too long, the character is not complex enough to handle a whole lot of screen time. I mean, what his powers are. He's very clever, he takes advantage of people, and he's super strong. One of the things my son said to me is, well, how is it that like, the super big two-arm smash kills Peter Parker but doesn't kill Miles? And is honestly one of the kind of thing that I would generally say about a film. However, I'm like, Miles is just tougher, right? You know, like, or he is. I mean, like, I don't think it was, like, unintentional. I think that when it happens, it's one of those things you're like, oh, like, Miles ain't no regular Spider-Man. And it also, like, I mean, I do think that the way Miles beats Fisk is by unlocking some of his hidden potential, which is always a great way to handle that last boss fight. Whether you do a double backflip over his flying thing, you know, I mean, either you have the bad guy destroy himself, which he does,
Yeah.
Or you unlock some previously unknown power, which which happens in a very funny way at the end of the movie Pacific Rim, which is a fantastic film. But it turns out that these robots have swords, right?
Right, yeah.
And we haven't used them previously,
Right.
But it's what allows them to cut the head off. Like anyway.
Yeah, I've been watching the How to Train Your Dragon films.
Oh,
in
yeah.
anticipation of the new one, and both of those have like he can also do this.
Yeah. If you stroke it back in this way, he can shoot like supersonic purple fire.
Right. Yeah.
That trailer made me cry.
The third one.
Yeah. I was like,
Yeah, I know. Very good. And also we'll have to talk about Glass coming out soon.
Yeah.
By the way, I was going to mention there are elements in this because it is so complex.
Yeah.
That you could certainly nitpick story elements, but I didn't feel like the need to do that at all in this. And I think it is because of how efficiently the story is told and the acknowledgement of certain elements. I love that they had said like this little hard drive that has like the key to destroying this machine, so tiny, and just like you just plug it in like a normal USB drive, just pull back this panel. But they just end up calling it like, a goober. Yeah. It's just like a thing. You always have a thing that
Right.
you like stop the machine with,
Right.
Like, and then like they never really explain it. I mean, they get like a computer with the information, but they're like, now we have it, the key,
Right.
And so it's like the MacGuffin, the classic, like there's just always a thing we got to get and do it. So I think story elements like that just like need to happen, and a lot of it just plays out with a lot of fun action.
Well, I mean, I think for me, it emphasizes something which I think almost all the other superhero films missed. They're like, it's not about the thing.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it's not about how cool the goober is. I mean, it's about how you get there.
Or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I think, like, if I could be permitted to say such a thing, I mean, there's a way in which, like, the superhero films have become like or represent like an amalgamation of like hero stories and also like sci-fi, and it has that sci-fi bit about exposition and look at this cool guy and here's some cool aliens and all this other stuff, along with these deeper archetypical stories about heroes on journeys and identity and whatnot. And I think it's a little too much sometimes. And I like how it was just so refreshing to see the focus be on this person and their journey and their relationships and the challenges and the way in which these different elements of Peter represented all the different tellings of many different tellings of Spider-Man and different possibilities for himself and Miles. And like as I've said before when we talked about Blade Runner, like there's this principle that existed in like ancient Indian theatrical business that like a good story contains all of the modes between like erotic and disgusting and beautiful and heroic and all these different things. And so there's something, and because the argument historically in that context is that it's satisfying. You satisfy all of the hungers, like a good meal, right? And there's an element of that with inclusion of Peter Porker and Penny Parker that like and these are modes and tropes that are from other kinds of comics, other kinds of movies, and I find it satisfying. I laughed, I cried in the film in a way that, like, if I watch Infinity War, like, what's the emotion I'm supposed to have? Like, oh, like, or like, whoa, the whole time, or some sort of like low grade, stimulation or awe. There's much clearer points in the film. Like, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm laughing, I'm crying.
And we haven't talked a lot about those other Spider-Mans, Spider-People.
Spider-Folks.
But I think they are really fun, and it manages to kind of give us just enough taste of them that we sort of want more. Like, what I loved about it is, like, I could virtually watch a movie about each of those characters. I felt like that would be really fun.
And Eli, I'm putting my hand on your shoulder for the listening audience. There is something about that that makes me so excited in my soul, and that is the following. Like, at some point, in the conception of this film or the production of this film, I am certain that there were plenty of people that talked about how this could be multiple films in multiple parts, stretched out and turned into an entire like franchise worth of things.
Yeah.
And somebody else or some other group of people, God bless your souls, said, no, wait, let us pack as much good shit into one film as it can possibly hold and make that film.
Right.
And honestly, like when I look at like the meta management of like the MCU and even other franchises at this time, I have not seen something like this in a long time.
Yeah.
Where they just poured talent and art and love and story after story after story into the same film.
Right. And what I love about a film like this, which I don't think we see in America a lot, the US made film, is like they just went for it and they're like, we're gonna make Spider-Gwen awesome. We're gonna make Spider-Man Noir awesome. Like we're gonna design them differently.
Yeah.
And they're gonna look cool, and we're not gonna worry about like it fitting into this certain box, you know.
Yeah.
And that they went for like the anime version. I don't remember. Yeah, I know she's Penny Parker. Did she have like a Spider-Man name? Spider-Woman name? I don't remember.
I don't know. I mean, because
robotic. Yeah. I don't know. But yeah, I mean that she is portrayed in anime style,
right?
Too, and I think all of those were not maybe easy choices to make on a sort of Hollywood film like that.
Yeah.
That they really went for it, and some of it again they have commentary on the fact that Spider-Man Noir is still in black and white, and Peter Porker says something about, do they know like animals talk in this universe? Things like that. So like funny things to make it work, like the questions that you might have. Also like fun casting that Spider-Man Noir is Nicolas Cage. Just like really smart choices that they're making.
And I mean, I'm playing I got my youngest son Lego Marvels, like Legos Marvel, like Lego Superhero Marvels 2.
Okay.
Or some combination of those words in an appropriate order. Which has a lot of stuff from the Spider-Verse in there. I mean, it's like Kang takes over New York and creates a Chronopolis, which has like it's like New York and Old New York and Nuevo York in the future and Hala and Asgard and the Old West.
Wow.
And Kunlun from Iron Fist and like Manhattan Noir. So like and so it's like the sprawling world. But it's really fun to like go and like Spider-Man Noir is in there, and it's really fun to go into these places and these characters in this video game, which we have a lot of fun with. It shows me that like they've coming up with these different conceptions for a long time because it makes these other places. About your comment about like going for it. Part of what I would say to that is like I'm also so excited that they just like took the film as a concept and went for it. But there's some level of looseness and freedom that they seem to have had to have done at the beginning to be able to include all these things, because the film is not campy.
No.
And it maintains seriousness and a mix of a whole lot of things. And feels at some points like Ghost in the Shell. It has these echoes of like complex seriousness.
Right.
That it's like, especially like when he's fighting with his uncle, and there's like these
And that's some of what I mean by like go for it. I think like I've always said in the US we don't get like serious animation for sci-fi or fantasy the way that they do in Japan. Like it's just, I think, not seen as economical here that it's going to sell. Which I think maybe they have a point. Sometimes it hasn't. But
no. But
usually I think it's sort of like half done. And certainly this is aimed at kids at some level, but there are definitely serious elements to it, I think. Obviously that adults can enjoy and appreciate, aimed at all those levels. So, I am heartened that hopefully this means that Hollywood sees like, oh, there is an audience for serious animation that tries new things and goes new places.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of the Hollywood approach to this weirdo geek genre of things is like, that's cool, like let's make a live action or real version of it, starting with starting somewhere around the Dolph Lundgren Punisher, which is terrible. Though I do have like deep love in my heart for the original Conan films, though they're adapted from. I mean, and I don't know if they're. I mean, I know they're adapted from his stories. I don't know if they're adapted from. I assume the comic books were before the movies in there, and I never read the comic books. Sure. But it's I love them. They're not particularly good, but like Arnold Schwarzenegger cuts a grand Conan figure, if there ever was one.
It's true.
So it seems like we've wrapped up. There is, or should we wrap up soon? The one thing I remember reading an article after the first Deadpool movie came out, and one of the general theme of the comments were like, "This is really great, but we don't need to make every film like this."
Right.
It is really awesome, but like let's
snarky.
Let's not have everything be like this. And in some sense, I would like to say something similar about this film, but not really, because I think that if every film were this good and done in this style, it would be fine. It can't be the exact same film because it would then be derivative. But I think that there's. Like if you, and I don't know how much you follow games, and I haven't played it, but like the art style of a game for the Switch called Octopath Traveler. So it's essentially like a 16-bit sprites in a 3-dimensional world. So like those 16-bit sprites have 3-dimensional space. And I haven't played the game, but I've watched it a lot. Yeah. And so it's a combination, or a game like Celeste, which is essentially like 8-bit sprites, but that moves in like a modern world. Like it doesn't it doesn't like there's shading and scaling and rotation and all these sorts of things in a way that an actual 8-bit console wouldn't have.
Didn't have,
but there's a way in which mixing these different stylized art forms to great effect that like I hope that continues to happen, because there's just a way. I'll say two things. One, Into the Spider-Verse does this multiplicity of things in a way that like something like Ready Player One tries to, but doesn't. Yeah, it's like, oh, it's a mishmash of everything. I'm like, no, it's like a mishmash of a couple things. Right. And cool, he's a Gundam, but like,
why?
I mean, it doesn't feel like a true multitude of like infinite multitude of possibilities.
Yeah, like they could really have fun with it.
Yeah,
do whatever they want.
I always forget the second thing when I say two things, Eli. What was it? Go ahead.
Well, I was going to bring up, I don't know how you felt about the first Sin City film, but I wonder if that could be sort of like a case study for like this film, which I've thought of the same thing when you said that. Like, well, I was like, well, how many films would I like to see in this style? But I think it's more for me the idea that, okay, maybe it's freed people up to say, we don't have to do the regular CG thing anymore. So it wouldn't look exactly like this. But I don't know that I like love the original Sin City film as a film in of itself. But I think I was very fascinated by it when it came out and thought it looked very cool. And did some great things. And the second one took a long time to come out. I don't know if I would say it's a full decade later. I'm not sure. But did not do well at all at the box office. Critics didn't like it.
I forgot that there was one.
And there might be other reasons. I don't think I've seen the full second one. But I just wonder if... Like, what was the difference in that time period that...
Oh, how did we change?
Yeah, how did we... Like, we're used to that style now so much that it's not novel. Yeah. And maybe it didn't do something new with it in the second one the way that maybe it should, but I could see a similar comparison. Like you said, if people are trying to do all the same thing now.
There is this... I mean, about the inclusion of multiple animation... styles or tropes in the film. One of the things that it reminds me of is like it feels very modern almost almost cyberpunky, in that like the world that is like commercial YouTubers or YouTubers, like they exist in a world of commentary that recognize that we are consumers of media and we consume a whole lot of things, and they come up with all kinds of crazy, Minecraft, Hot Wheels, pancake mashup, Star Wars stuff that's entertaining. And I think that there's a way in which Into the Spider-Verse addresses us as we are as viewers of a variety of different things. I mean, particularly as parents of children, we watch adult things and kid things and superhero things and a whole bunch of stuff. But just like my kids are growing up in a world in which they see all kinds of varieties of animation styles and addresses and a length of films and things from tiny little YouTube videos that kids their age make, all the way up to like fully produced Hollywood stuff, to interactive films, to video games. There's all kinds of different characters and concepts that they encounter, and the Spider-Verse feels like it speaks to that person. Like that it appeals to and speaks to and connects with the modern viewer in a way that it wasn't clear until I saw the film that a whole host of other films don't. Even in the concept
audiences are asking for
right. It's also like, we've talked about our love of like multiple protagonist films, and there's clearly like one protagonist in this film, but there are arguably a whole lot. Certainly, like if you cut it right down the middle, at like the 60th minute or something, there are a lot of people that want a single thing and are trying to get it in this film. And they are somewhat extras for Miles' story, but they're there for so much of the film that it's also their story, and we also care about their stories, and they're also trying to get things in the same way that Miles is.
I think I found myself surprised, which I don't think happens in animation very much, by the Peter B. Parker character when they are all in like Spider-Man server disguise, and he runs into the alternate universe MJ, and just like in that exchange, how much I sort of learned about him and where he was at. Surprised me. I was like, oh, this is a deeper character, and he's not just here to be the sort of like wise, unwise trainer for Miles. Like, he has his own story arc.
And what a really interesting way to tell and not tell his story, and for him to characterize and not characterize himself. And it's a really like this. I mean, Mistaken Identity is classic as stories go.
Right.
But it was just like a refreshing inclusion.
So funny too, And I think what you're saying is really strong this year, especially too, because in the final numbers, like Black Panther is the most popular, made the most money of 2018 as we're going out of that year. And so clearly there is audience for films that are not just sort of whitewashed, homogenized, what we normally get with these sort of white heroes. And I think this really proves that not only is Miles multicultural in who he is, but I think the film, like you said, is conveying all these different perspectives and styles that would relate to lots of different people. And I think that's a sort of signal that this sort of thing can be popular.
Yeah, I mean, there's I don't know how strong this point is that I'm about to make, but it's personally relevant to me, and maybe it'll be relevant to our listeners too. I mean, there's a good friend of mine got me like a motivational / I guess self-help book about leadership for Christmas. And it's by an author that I won't mention, but just because I don't want to mention the person's name. But one of the things that my criticism of this particular author, who does TED Talks and has sort of like a very public presence, is that all of this author's discussion about leadership and courage and all the other concepts that this author talks about, it is devoid of discussions of class or race or any of those things. And for that reason, it's almost of no use to me, because it's like, how do I even, like, I encounter those things like in this town of Madison all the time, and I see it and I'm aware of it, if it's not part of what I'm doing in my own personal growth, it just none of it sticks. It's totally useless to me, essentially. And I think that there's a sense that and I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but Miles's character, in and of himself, because of the race of the character and the race of his family and the situation in which they live, he lives in the world in which there is the complex problems of the modern world. Yeah. In the way that if you look at the other white Peter Parkers that have existed in other films, they can choose or not choose to acknowledge the existence of those things, but his character doesn't. He could. There's a way in which Miles Morales could be essentially just like Peter Parker and live in a cute little, but he isn't written that way, and Jason Reynolds doesn't write characters that way, and they didn't make this film that way. He's filled with other interesting black characters, in the same way that Black Panther has so many different black characters. Right. Because I think it goes with my point earlier that one of the reasons why I have trouble identifying with other superheroes is they seem to come out of, they're like some different version of Clark Kent in 1954 from good old Kansas, an aw shucks kind of character, and that's not my world. And because I don't want my hero in their identity to represent an escape from my world. I want my hero to look at the nuclear missile that is going to come and destroy us, or the red threat, or whatever the insurmountable challenge of our time, and come up with an amazing and powerful solution to that problem, or die in the struggle to do so. Right. Because that's what I need my heroes to do.
Right. And I think the sort of message, the direct message they're trying to convey in the film of sort of taking this leap of faith to step out, which is a variant on the with great power comes great responsibility. But I think it's even going with my 10-year-old is maybe even more powerful for him as a message that I want him to get is yes, it can be hard to do the right thing sometimes. It can maybe be hard to use your prominence in the world and stuff in the way that you should, but it's and maybe you'll make mistakes, but at least you should step out there and do it. And that's what I would want him to hear. Don't hold back because of those things.
And I don't know what it was like always in human history, but I know a lot of the challenges that I face myself and a lot of the challenges that I help to try to educate my kids about are not so much about learning things, but it's about, in a world where you know so much, how do you figure out what the right choice is? And even if you know what the right choice is, how do you have courage to do that? I think that's something that we talk a little bit about on our other podcast about how do white people encourage other white people to be anti-racist, or to make appropriate choices, or how are we inadvertently encouraging others, saying it's not a big deal, right? There's, and I think that always should be the role of a good story of a hero. It pulls you and drags you in that direction and helps you develop. They have a magical sword which grants them courage, but you in their story learn how to gain courage yourself. And it was just so refreshing to see a character and a number of characters written around all those different sort of classic but perennial emotional cruxes.
So I think overall, we really love this film. We've both only seen it once, right?
True.
And so I'm looking forward to seeing it more. And all the little bits that I missed or just want to see more clearly. I'm excited for that.
And just at the end here, it's probably in my top 3 superhero films of all time. And I
what are the other ones? Can you name a couple?
Just throw. Gosh. It's 1, 2, 3. It's Unbreakable, the original Iron Man, and then this. Do
you have any placement for Spider-Man movies? Do you have any love for the?
Other ones? It's Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
And I watched the original. I recently rewatched Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2, and Spider-Man 3 with my kids. And I was pretty amazed at how mediocre Spider-Man 1 was. And I used to when I taught film like a little bit at college and high school, like I taught Spider-Man 2 because I loved it, and I had clips from it that I would always use to do stuff. Even when I taught like middle school kids, sometimes I would use it. So I loved it, and it is about as good as I remember it being. Yeah. But I've seen it 50, 60 times. And the third one, I was like, oh yeah, I remember this now. Woo! And I love that that's their approach essentially in the Spider-Verse too. Like, and then there's this thing like, we don't know what happened there.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I think I've only seen all of 3 once in the theater, but I actually saw I would agree the second one is pretty great.
Yeah.
The latest one with Tom Holland, Homecoming, was actually quite good. I
think watched it here the other day.
He could be one of the better live action, the best Peter Parkers. I think the only downside is, not that I would want to get the same origin story a third time, but it's so tied into the MCU now that it's sort of like a weird, like if I was going to show it to my son who has not seen any of the other MCU films, like he'd be like, what is going on? Who's this Iron Man doing? Like, what? He just like gives him a suit. But overall, I think it's like captures more of the fun of that character. In those different aspects, and it's pretty smart. It's pretty well done. But I wouldn't say it's my favorite.
Yeah. I mean, Spider-Man. I mean, like Into the Spider-Verse is my favorite, and then Spider-Man 2 wouldn't it be number 2? There. I mean, I don't know that I need to include other.
The other thing, we were recently just watching the first Tobey Maguire one. With Sam Raimi with my kids. And I was thinking about how Spider-Man, actually, the character has never meant anything to me. Like, I read some comics growing up, and still now, I don't really have a desire to read Spider-Man comics of that character, but I was so surprised how much I enjoyed that Sam Raimi film at the time. And now the effects look quite dated in some of the plot points and stuff. You can really feel it. But at the time, I was just remembering back how impressed I was. How much fun I had with that film.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it so many things, Eli. What I also remember about that time, I mean, it was like they're making a Spider-Man film, right? And Sam Raimi is directing it,
right?
Kind of like, the first Sam Raimi film I saw was Army of Darkness, which is probably the same for lots of people.
Yeah.
And I was, because this was several years after the Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. had been on television with Bruce Campbell, and like this was when we were still in our basements, right? Like all of us, all the comic book Dungeons and Dragons. This was an age in which like there were not a lot of things that we obsessed about outside of Star Wars that could be seen on the big screen.
Yeah.
Cross-applied Dolph Lundgren Punisher /
right.
A whole bunch of, like Ang Lee Hulk. And so it was fascinating, that like just the mere idea that they would have this, and that it would be a superhero film, and that it would be decent.
Yeah.
It, and that and not like campy or kitschy or too, like it had the right tone.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the amazing thing that I look back on is it is very like comic booky.
Yeah.
But he was sort of like the perfect person at that time to pull off that tone.
Right. And it was
like it is a little campy.
Right. And it was
like on purpose.
Yeah, and it was over the top at the time. Right. It seems tame now. But I mean, I was like utterly flabbergasted when I saw it. And then and 2, and I think 2 holds up. I think 2 is solid. Yeah. And when I saw 2, I was like, wow. And
I love probably because I don't know if we'll talk about Spider-Man movies again, but the moment with Doc Ock in the hospital where he kills the people is so straight out of Evil Dead. Or
that is like absolute. It could be its own
the
little
people screaming.
Like Sam Raimi short film.
Yeah. Just to like throw that in a mainstream comic book movie is like crazy.
Yeah. And because I remember my oldest son watched, he was like, "Whoa, that was really intense." He's like a little scary. Yeah. And also like to see, because the real bright point in Spider-Man 2 is Alfred Molina and the way that he portrays Doc Ock, who's, I mean, like, and he's a great visual take on the guy. It's very modern. He's also like, I mean, the 2 or 3 scenes you get when he's like tutoring Peter when he's talking about literature with his wife beforehand.
Yeah.
It's just like an essential amount of characterization. And then and he's again like he's not evil. Like
he has motivation. Yeah.
Right. I mean, he just wants something and is going a terrible way about to get it, which is an interesting and complicated character.
Yeah.
Not like a variety of other versions of characters. Because I mean, one of the probably top 4 superhero films. Like The Incredibles. Like The Incredibles is probably number. It's like the originals. It's like Unbreakable, the first Iron Man, Into the Spider-Verse, Incredibles, probably the first Avengers, maybe.
Yeah.
It's a great film, but we watched it a lot. But the Incredibles has that meta level to their, and even like Syndrome's like, oh, you gotta be monologuing again. I mean, like it's and it also coins some fantastic dynamics in the viewership and analysis of and the culture of worship, because the characters in that film who worship superheroes, and he also becomes a villain, and so like there's all that stuff is sort of well done in there, and I think honestly belongs more alongside the Spider-Verse than other films. 1, because it's animated. 2, because it also has this approach that it addresses us as viewers, as people who have viewed a variety of things and have read comic books and watched movies and all that sorts of stuff. And one of the things that I also, one of the last things I'll point out about the Spider-Verse is I always like it when the comic books are in the story. Yeah. Like Miles Morales reads Spider-Man in the story.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that there was a Spider-Man in his world.
Right.
And so they did have another shorthand in the narrative that they could just be like, well, how do I be Spider-Man? Let me read the comic. And this is what he does. Yeah. So, and that does give it internal motivation for the style, too. So
right. And I also feel, there's some element of like, And I don't know who provides this in a comic book enterprise. It's probably someone like Stan Lee, who like provides age and wisdom for characters. Like and you see this in Watchmen with the Night Owl, right? Because there's two different versions of him, 2 different iterations of him that are in there. It also has to do with tutelage, but like the idea that like a human superhero is not going to last forever. Right. And like as time goes on, you're eventually going to have to pass down the mantle or the cowl or the owl ship or whatever to someone else, and they get to do that right off the bat. Right. In Spider-Verse. So.
Yeah. So we highly recommend you seeing it. If you haven't seen it, you probably have. Give us any feedback that you have. Glad to hear it. That's extratextualshow@gmail.com. Yeah.
If you're interested in a really fun Xbox One game, you can play Marvel Lego Superheroes 2, where the comical character of Deadpool has been replaced in this alternate universe with a comical Gwenpool, who is decked out in white and pink and pops around in various spots doing crazy things.
Very nice. A couple recommendations there for you. Yeah. All right. We'll talk more next time.